Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor, and welcome back to the Thaumaturge, an indie isometric adventure RPG that I had covered a few months ago as kind of a first impressions thing. For full disclosure, I had received an early copy of the game from the publisher through Keymailer, so though I will not let that affect my impressions or opinions of this game, and I have many of them, I do want to throw that out there right at the beginning. So if you have not seen my first impressions video, quick recap: you play as Victor Shulsky, a Thaumaturge, meaning you can sense emotions from people using the objects they've touched or kind of the way that they act. And Thaumaturges in this world are able to tame salutors, which are kind of like demons or angels or spirits, however you want to call them. And they're able to use these salutors in combat and for other things. Now, I want to talk about the story and side quests, then move on to, kind of the gameplay, starting with combat and then miscellaneous, and finally ending with my overall impressions of the game. As Victor, as I previously stated, you go to this small town because you're having some major problems being a Thaumaturge. You're having blockages that you haven't been able to fix for about 15 years, and your last hope is to find this one healer you've heard about. That you get to, and you find out this is Grigory Rasputin. Yes, that Rasputin, that historical figure, a major player in Russia's court around the early 1900s. And he effectively goes into your mind and cures you. So you start treating him like this savior figure, like he's so grand. And he starts inserting himself into your, into your life, into your business. And as you're about to leave the small town to go back to Warsaw, or potentially explore more of the world, you get a letter from your sister saying, "Hey, Dad's dead." And you're like, well, guess I'm going home. That's where the prologue ends. That's where my initial first impressions ended. But after that point, Rasputin hears about this, offers to accompany you to Warsaw. Now, for full context, this is Warsaw in 1905, which, historically speaking, was a time of massive change and upheaval for Poland because they were trying to rid themselves of the multiple nations that had taken over her land and her people. Now, this is an alternate history version because Thaumaturges, as far as I understand it, did not exist to such a degree, and maybe call me ignorant on this, I do not believe had the ability or have the ability to control demons and spirits to affect people's minds. Now, I could be totally wrong, and that's fine, but part of me wants to say this is alternate history and a little bit of fiction. Anyway, you go back, Rasputin basically says, "Listen, Victor, I'm sorry about your father. I'll hit you up soon, and we'll talk about it." So Victor's like, "Okay, sure, whatever." And then you go talk to your sister, who's like, "I haven't seen you in 15 years. What the hell?" You hash out some things with her, hash out some things with your uncle, happens to be a judge in the judicial system, which will be important later. And then you attend your father's reading of the will. You don't really get to the funeral per se, but we go through this long list of, he's left this to her, we've left this to him, da 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 da. Victor gets nothing except for his father's grimoire, which is apparently missing and no one's sure where it is. So this obviously entices Victor because he's a prideful person. He really wants that grimoire, but also confuses him because he's not sure where it could be. So this leads you down three paths, or three investigation lines that you have to go through. One, how did your father die? Because everyone's kind of wary of it at first, to tell you at least, and then you find out later that, yeah, an entire building dropped on him, and he was just crushed to death along with a few other people, and you're like, that's not suspicious at all. Two, where is his grimoire? And three, you are tasked with talking to Albuquerque, a friend of Victor's from childhood who kind of runs the underworld to some degree, because he may have information on what happened to your father and kind of what's going on in the city, given you've been away for 15 years. Not only that, but you get a call from Rasputin at your home. Now, in 1905, calls were not just a common thing, everyone does it. Very few people had phones. Very few people had the ability to call others because you had to tell an operator, "Hey, can you connect me to this person on this extension?" It was a whole process to be able to connect with someone on the phone. But Rasputin calls like it's nothing, and Victor's like, "Hey, how did you get my number? How do you know where I live? And what is going on?" And Rasputin's just like, don't worry about it, Victor, it's okay. And just completely blows you off. And he's like, hey, come down to the cemetery and meet me. You're like, why are you at the cemetery? He's like, no, I'm staying with this lovely couple near the cemetery. So you go, you visit him, and then you ask him, hey, what are you doing here? Like, why did this couple let you stay? He again just brushes you off, like, it's okay, Victor, I help whoever needs it. And it's like, okay, that's not an answer to my question, but whatever. So we're gonna kind of, from here, go down the three different paths. So the first one is investigating what happened to Father's grimoire, and to do that you visit him at the grave. Now when you do visit him, a Jewish man asks you, and I mentioned that he's Jewish because it isn't plot relevant, it is story important, what has happened to your father? And you say you don't really know, because at this point, you didn't know a building fell on him. We find that out in just a little bit. I'm just saying it for the sake of brevity. And then you go into your father's grave, you can be a real jerk and just like say some horrible things to him. I chose not to, because I was like, you know what, let's not do anything that's going to affect the relationship too much. Even though he's dead, he might still come back as a ghost. Spoiler alert, he kind of does. Anyway, while you're visiting him, a member of the Okrana, or secret police, comes to visit you and is like, hey, I worked really closely with your dad, I hope we can get along. And you're just like, I don't know you, dude, get out of my face. And you kind of leave. So you're left with questions of, okay, who was this guy that was asking about how he died? And who was this other guy that is saying, hey, your father, who was an accomplished thaumaturge, worked with us for a long time? And so you go about your time, go back to your sister, and she basically answers, the Jewish fellow is someone who worked with your father up until about a year ago, and the member of the Okrana is someone who's been helping out the family for a while now. So both of those, connections kind of seem to be there, but they're not too heavily explored at this point in time. Then you start kind of going down this path of, okay, how did my father die? What happened here? And so you start investigating why a building would have fallen on him, or what happened to the building, kind of what enemies he might have had. There was definitely anger at the building site when you go around and you investigate. And you slowly start to unravel this mystery that your father had a lover, a secret partner, but you're not sure who it is. But that will be revealed shortly. So we're going to cut this thread just a little bit short for now. The final story beat that you go down is talking to Alkretsu, who A, kidnaps you from your father's, crime scene, and then B, tortures you until he asks for your help in fighting some guys, because that's just the weird introduction you get to him. Then you fight off this rival gang, and then he's like, oh, Victor, that was awesome. Let's do this again, just like old times. Let's get drunk as all hell. And then you go about this party, and you just go into bar after bar, shot after shot, until you run into these Russian guys who want to fight again. So you keep fighting them. But now one of their buddies is missing. It started out as 3, now it's 2. And so you fight the 2 guys, and they're like, oh, no, that our other guy, he's off drinking, he's brooding, he's being alone. So this is where I want to kind of diverge into side quest territory. And I will mention when some things are main quest versus side quest. Up until now, we have been dealing with main quest, and it's been very brief. But now we're going to jump into a side quest. So this is the first side quest to help you get another salutor. There are a total of 8 in the game, 7 of which can be acquired through story missions, the first of which you just start out with. So this one is a story mission where is a side mission where you find out that this guy has been drinking really heavily after the death of his subordinate in the military, and you come to find out later that he's also having some troubles with his fiancée. So long story short, after some investigation, you discover that this guy was actually not in love with his fiancée, but was in love with his subordinate. But because he had such a love and obsession with Russian roulette, he had challenged so many people to it. He had challenged this man that he loved, but would not admit to, because 1905, Russia was not very accepting of homosexuals, to a game of Russian roulette. Now you can all see where this is going. His lover, I don't know. Okay, the man he was in love with, because I don't want to call him his lover as I don't know the full extent of their relationship, did end up dying in that game of Russian roulette, as can happen, as is the entire point of Russian roulette. And ever since then, he has been attached to this depression, this misery, this one flaw, which a salutor has attached itself to. And so when you pull out this flaw, you fight with the salutor, which again I'll get to later, and you claim your first salutor, which is a really interesting, interaction, a really interesting consequence of following a main quest that kind of turned into a side quest as long as you chose to continue to investigate. But let's jump back to the main story for a second. Your sister invites you to a party, or rather has an invitation to a party and wants you to attend with her. Now, your family is rather well off, and this has certainly caused some animosity within certain groups that I'll get to, but has also meant you're invited to some of the high society parties that you hated going to, at least your character did. But you get all dolled up, you get ready for the party, and you go. This is where you find the hostess of the party, someone in the Tsar's court, or Tsar, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, the leader of all of Russia before they had the president, is your father's affair partner. You find out that she and your father were having a secret affair, and that she has been keeping secrets of the Okhrana, of the Tsar's court, in case she ever needed blackmail material. So naturally, you're like, oh, maybe this is why Dad was killed. This is a big, big issue. Anyway, there is a seance going on at this party, and you discover that the woman running the seance, I can't remember her name, Madame something, I can't remember her name, is also a thaumaturge, and is also looking for a salutor that you've discovered previously at this party. And then during the seance, you're able to extract the flaw of one of the partygoers and get the salutor which has been attracted to her flaw. This will really anger the seance conductor. Again, I can't remember her name, but you are able to kind of get away with it for now. This will come up later, which is an interesting fact, but it's kind of where this part of the story ends. So once you've run down all three of these story leads, you are kind of thrust into Act 2. One thing I should mention here, now that we have acquired 2 additional salutors, is whenever you get one, you have to go back to Rasputin, and he will help you tame them, as he puts it, basically where he puts you in a trance, and then he connects them for you, so that you can now use them to upgrade your abilities, but again, we will get there. The first act ends with Svetlana, your father's lover, revealing to you that she has a whole bunch of secrets on the Okhrana, and asks you to help her get out of Warsaw. So this becomes kind of your final objective for the first act. You then go to a new area that you've unlocked down by the pier. You work with someone named Ariel, who will help you find Javier, who will help you smuggle her out of the city. So you do these things for Javier that he asks you to do, like fighting in the ring, and then they agree to smuggle Svetlana out. At which point she tells you your father has been in league with other thaumaturges with the goal of helping free Warsaw, helping free Poland from the grips of the other nations who have been strangling it for so long. This obviously comes as a major shock, but then as she's on the boat leaving, you're attacked by a golem. Yes, the mythical creature from Jewish folklore. Again, this will be important. In this universe, a salutor made physically manifest. Then the salutor attacks you at the pier, just about kills you, certainly kills Javier and Svetlana. Finally, you need to leave the pier where you're stopped by the secret police, Okhrana, and you're basically like, well, I mean, I didn't do anything, I don't know what you're talking about. Previously, you had beaten up some Okhrana at Svetlana's apartment to help her escape, and they're saying, listen, you're under arrest, come with us. But then it's that guy you met when you were visiting your father's grave. He shoots his subordinate in the chest and says, hey, I know where your father's grimoire is. Help me and I'll help you. And you kind of form an uneasy truce for now and decide to walk away. And thankfully he doesn't just shoot you in the back. Now this kicks off Act 2. Act 2 also has 3 primary objectives, the first of which is to find your father's grimoire, the second of which is to find the source of the golem curse that has been placed on your family and how to break it. The third is to find this Thaumaturge society your father seems to be a part of. Now, before we jump into those, I do want to get to some of the side quests. Now, I will not be mentioning all of them as there are a fair few. I just want to focus on some of the more interesting ones that kind of got me really hooked. And I use hooked in this case as a pun for this first side quest I want to mention that takes place in the port area of the city, where you're able to find a murder victim that's had their eyes taken out and replaced with stones. Now, the police say, oh, it's the work of the fishermen, this is their 6th victim, meaning they've killed 5 other people. And you're like, whoa, what is going on here? This is crazy. And it's basically the small town mentality of, we'll take care of it, we can handle our own, we don't need your help, big city boy. And you also find a guy painting the dead body, and you're like, hang on, that's awful suspicious, why are you here, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know, ever since I saw the first one, the only time I can really feel something is when I'm painting these bodies. I have to do it. It becomes a compulsion. So naturally, a lot of red flags are going off, and you start suspecting him of being the killer, because why would you paint bodies if you're not the killer? Anyway, you then start asking around. You can ask some little kids for help, and then you get one of them to really dig in and help you, because he has connections with the, let's call them working ladies, for a YouTube-friendly term. And, naturally, these sorts of professions are usually ones where people are willing to spill their guts and other bodily fluids, but it means that they, hear a lot of secrets, they get involved with a lot of things, so you kind of follow up on that by asking around, saying, hey, I'm a friend of this little kid, and they're all, aunties to him, and they're like, okay, listen, you're his friend, you're a good guy, I'll tell you what I know. And then you work and investigate to get the police to reopen the investigation, because they just arrested the painter, saying, it must be him. Why else would he be painting these bodies? And so you get it reopened only after people start going missing again. People, there's still stuff happening while he's in prison. And I will put in some spoilers for side quests, so if you don't want those spoilers, please click a few minutes ahead. I will try to put a timestamp in the video if I remember. But it turns out one of the, ladies with a job has been killing people because she's just miserable. She hates the situation that she's in. It doesn't seem to be a necessary rhyme or reason. There's no real pattern to the people that she's killed, but they all had something in common that kind of triggered this need for her to do it, to the point where she almost killed this little boy. Now, I don't know how much of an impact my decisions directly had in terms of whether he lived or died. In my playthrough, he did live, and I don't know if it's possible for him to pass away. But then you have her arrested, they let the artist go, at which point you can find the artist and take Morana, the salutor that's been attached to him, away. And this sense of melancholy for him disappears. Which is really interesting. This is something I haven't really touched on, but salutors are attracted to someone's flaw. Now, this flaw seems to be a fundamental building block for their personalities. And when you take that away from them, they change as a person. Sometimes they lose their passion. Sometimes they lose this sense of melancholy, and maybe they'll get inspired to do something, to get out of this sense of depression that they've been in. But it's almost never for the better. And you can, in certain cases, pull a flaw without taking a salutor, because there's only 8 salutors, but I believe 12 different flaws. And we'll get into that when we talk more about gameplay. But now that we've wrapped up this murder, let's go investigate our father's shop that we've been locked away from because our sister said, hey, I'm still organizing some things. Give me a minute. And that was just to keep you out of it in Act 1. So we go to the area for Act 2, and then we're like, oh, hey, there's something leading me into this market. Let's go have a look at that. Where you find out that someone's been acting as a pickpocket. Someone's been acting as a thief. And you're like, oh, this is interesting. And you feel the presence of a jinn from Middle Eastern folklore. Jinn being what we might know as a genie, the kind of care for what you wish for sort of thing. So you find and follow this pickpocket or thief to her home, where you interrogate her little brother, and then you follow her to a brothel, at which point you can reveal the fact that she's been stealing from the fence that she works for, and then steal her steal her salutor. It's honestly not as captivating as the murder one, not just because there's no murder, but just it seems very simple, very overdone in the sense, like someone's stealing to benefit their family, but oh, their stealing got too far, or sorry, went too far, and now they're stealing from the wrong people, and yada yada yada. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of it's not as like impactful as I wanted it to be. And I think, and I hate to say this last salutor really takes the cake for being the least interesting. So you can find what are known as urban secrets in the world, which are just like little, you would almost think miscellaneous side quests, because they're not really like long or anything. You go to a place and you're done. But this one, you find this thing that says, hey, you can find fireworks at this place. So you go to this warehouse and you start finding clues, and then just the salutor basically appears. And it's weird because it's Krampus. Yes, the Santa's counterpart and who beats bad children with a rod, Krampus. And it's like, wait, what? Why is he here? What is going on? And it's just, it seems really out of the blue, really unexpected, because there's not really like this storyline that you're following. You're just looking, you're investigating this thing that told you to go here because you've done it 12.5 times before. But now it's leading to this tangible reward of a salutor, and you're like, this feels undeserved. And Act 2 kind of takes an interesting turn, because getting back to the main story, you investigate your father's shop to find out that the man who he had spoken to, that your sister already told you about, was his former employee, and that he left about a year ago on bad terms. So you have to figure out, okay, why did he leave? So you start investigating that, at which point you find out it leads into your father's work in the Thaumaturge Society. This man was not a member of it. He did not like Thaumaturges, but he was a member of the Jewish community, and your father had killed another member of this Jewish community, which had angered a lot of people. Now, as far as I understand it, your father did not do this out of a sense of malice or a sense of superiority or the obvious comparisons that can be made with certain political groups. Your father did this as a way to protect other members of the Jewish community, because this man was not doing good things. Now, I don't remember the specifics, so I don't want to start making accusations, especially because it's a video game, but it seems like your father was not the terrible, evil demon that he was depicted as or seen as by this man. And this man worked with his local rabbi to create and start the golem. Now, you find out about this, and you find the doctor who was supporting and helping the Jewish community that you go talk to find out the doctor is a thaumaturge. And you're like, oh, hang on, I knew your father. And then he reveals to you that he was one of the members of this Thaumaturge Society, alongside Madame person whose name I can't remember. And the other member of the society is actually Ariel Rafa, the person who helped you get in contact with the smuggler from Act 1. I did intentionally hide the fact it was a thaumaturge, just because I thought it added a little dramatic tension. But you're told, hey, you need to go and talk with Ariel, because he needs to help you create the end to the golem curse. You have to do the special ritual, which will help you end the curse once and for all. And so you do that, and then you can tell, then you find out, oh no, the golem is now attracted to your sister's flaw. Your sister Ligia is like, listen, I'll help you, but you gotta make sure I'm gonna be okay with this. And basically, Ariel says, you give me the salutor, you give me the flaw, and I'll help you, no problem. So you tell him yes, and when it comes down to it, when you've captured the golem in the basement of the synagogue, you can choose to betray him. You can choose to say, listen, I'm going to take either the flaw, the salutor, or both. I chose both because I was greedy, and man, did that bite me later. So you take both, you now have all 8 salutors, and you have your sister's flaw, which I will get into the gameplay implications of later. Ariel storms off because he's understandably pissed at you for betraying your promise. And now all that's left to do is deal with this growing problem that I've been leaving in the background of Rasputin. Now, throughout the act, you go to Rasputin occasionally to talk to him, be like, hey, how's it going? During this time, Rasputin is effectively gathering a cult of powerful individuals, and you're like, what the hell is going on here? Because you're technically one of them. And there are some interesting things happening around the residence that he's staying in, and he's getting a little more, not aggressive, but a little more culty. Like it's questionable. And so you're forced to talk to him, be like, hey, what's going on? He kind of, brushes you off as per usual. So you're not really in a place to argue with him, so to speak. And after all this happens, guess what? You're arrested by the Okrana, by the same guy who's been, moving in on your sister in a romantic way, which is really creepy, as well as the one who's been trying to, quote, help you this whole time. Now, you are trapped with other members of the kind of pro-Thaumaturge society because they were arrested for their activities, and it's that whole, you're trapped with a veteran and a newbie, like, little kid. I shouldn't say little kid, he's probably early 20s, but the veteran says, hey, I'm actually, insert younger guy's name here, and so he gets taken away and tortured and killed, leaving the younger guy with this sense of guilt because he feels like it should have been him, that he should have been the one to die, not his veteran friend. And then you're taken in for interrogation with the Okrana. But guess who's there other than Madame Samira, the Thaumaturge society member and seance conductor we'd seen the previous acts. You can, as I did, convince Samira to work with you and help you escape, meaning you leave the Okrana guy stunned for a while, and then you rescue the younger guy, able to break him out of jail. Now, I believe it is possible, because this is a very decision-based game, to leave him in there to die, but I'm glad I didn't because it'll come into play later. Then you escape the Citadel and get ready for the end of Act 2. In escaping the Citadel, we also found our father's grimoire, and we bring it back to the Thaumaturge Society. Now, one important thing I have left out up until this point is how a decision I made will affect us. That will conclude Act 2 for now, though, and we'll get into Act 3. So Act 3 basically starts off with, okay, you need to get everyone in the society together to deal with this grimoire, because it's going to require all of us to activate some special power that our father thought Thaumaturges could achieve, which is effectively sharing our thoughts. So telekinesis, so telepathy, as well as sharing our powers, because each Thaumaturge deals with a different dimension, because each salutor deals with a different dimension, and each Thaumaturge kind of focuses in on that initial dimension. Now, you already have the doctor that I mentioned previously, as well as Madame Samira, but you need to go talk to Ariel. And if you haven't already clued in, I did a great job at pissing Ariel off by taking both my sister's flaw and the golem away from him. So, when you go to check on him, you find there are anti-Thaumaturge riots in the streets. People are going absolutely crazy against Thaumaturges, and unfortunately, because Ariel did not have the golem with him, he was quite literally beaten to death, and he dies knowing that he was able to foil your plans once and for all, which makes him really, really happy because he hates Victor. You're also asked to finally kind of decide and deal with Rasputin. So you're basically said you have to choose him or us. Now, you've had a long and storied past with Rasputin at this point. You've helped him out, he's helped you out, and you've, really assisted him in gaining power. His motives haven't exactly been clear. He does say throughout the game that he wants to cure the Tsar's son and prevent this apocalypse that he's been seeing, but he isn't really clear on what that means or how he's going to do it, and is very much set up as like the bad guy from the shadows, which I was pretty much expecting. And finally, the game ends off with you at a party for the Tsar, celebrating, I think, his birthday. And you have to basically deal with all of the factions you've been dealing with up until this point. One of whom is the break off Thaumaturge faction, or like Thaumaturge assisting faction that wants to see Poland freed, that was arrested with us at the Citadel. And because I saved the younger guy, I was able to convince Wanda to not go in and try to shoot the Tsar. I was able to convince her just to leave and, enjoy the company of the people that are still left alive. Don't cause more bloodshed and more misery where there doesn't have to be any. I then convinced the Governor General to let us upstairs, at which point you go through a whole sequence of dealing with your past trauma, talking to your father, and being judged by what you do, what you have said, in order to... Honestly, I don't know what, if anything, it achieves. It kind of felt shoehorned in at the end. Finally, you meet with the Tsar, and I was able to convince him to, support Thaumaturges, stop all this talk against them, and not go or trust fully in Rasputin's abilities because, he was just too suspicious. At which point it kicks off a boss fight against Rasputin, which is actually kind of interesting, and I'll get to in the gameplay section. But after defeating him, I was able to get a medium ending with, everyone alive, Ligia kind of just sad and depressed, Victor working with the Thaumaturge Society as they discover a new faction, a new political faction moving around in Germany that's causing a lot of problems that could be a huge headache for Thaumaturges because they're rounding up and murdering Thaumaturges, known as the Nazis. So yes, it does end with the growing Nazi regime, which was an interesting story to touch on. Now, I have left out so much in terms of the side quests, in terms of a lot of detail from the main quest, but I did want to kind of go through a very, very, very brief, very high-level overview of the story, just so you had an idea of what I dealt with, and now I want to get into gameplay. So now with story out of the way, I want to talk about combat a little bit. Now, combat's weird because it is both complex, yet really simple when you break it down, and unfortunately not in the way that, like, oh, it's, complex until you master it, and then when you master it, you're really good at it. This is just, it's complex until you understand it, and then you're like, oh, that was it, that was all? So it's kind of underwhelming in a sense. Now, if you've already seen my previous video, you know that it's turn-based combat, you are able to attack, and then your salutor is able to attack. Now, with each salutor, they do different things or have a different, kind of win condition that they're going for. Some want to destroy the enemy's focus so they can do their big, powerful attack. Some want to inflict more of like a bleed or status effect on the opponent. Some want to inflict just other negative status effects so they can take advantage of that. Which I think is interesting, but you also then are given enemies that are resistant to your attacks or resistant to negative status effects until they're attacked by a specific salutor from a specific dimension, meaning that you can have enemies that will just tank through 80% of the damage you can do to them because you don't have the right salutor or the right level in that particular dimension to take care of their defenses. And it gets really annoying when you have to have like a dimension level of 6 in a particular thing that maybe you haven't focused on, and now you just have a group of enemies that are taking 80% less physical damage and are potentially doing a lot of damage to you. So the system, I think, has definitely some complexities, some intricacies that need to be learned and adapted to over time. Like, for example, I really liked using Morana's skills because they took away an enemy's focus, and then she had a attack that did X number of damage based on how much focus was missing from your opponent, meaning I think it was 8 for every missing focus piece. So like, if they were missing 4 focus, that's 32 damage. Like, that is hitting hard, which was really interesting. But then I was almost using her for one person, then using another salutor for another person, another salutor for another person. It didn't feel like I could just choose to spec into one playstyle. I had to have all 4 or more ready to go depending on the situation. Also, the golem is massively overpowered, and yes, they compensate with that by making him slow, but if you're able to get into a rhythm of, resetting an opponent's attack, and then getting him on the field and just wrecking face, absolutely do it, because he will demolish them. But speaking of that, Morana even has a skill, again, she was my main when I got her, of pushing an enemy's attack back to the end of the queue. It's like, oh, no, back to the end, back to the end. I could effectively take someone out of a fight, but I also technically took Morana out of the fight. But it was interesting in that it opened up more opportunities, but those opportunities themselves, though, weren't as deep and complex as I wanted them to be. And there is too much combat in this game that just feels way too monotonous, like you are doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And they don't really add in interesting opponents. Yeah, you have some that attack you with knives or swords to make you bleed. You have some that shoot you. And admittedly, I did play the game on easy difficulty because I didn't want to really, throw a whole bunch of time and stuff into learning the fighting mechanics. And I'm kind of glad I didn't, because even on the core level, unless higher difficulties add in more complexity and not just, oh, they now hit harder or they have more health or both, this game is not the most complex when it comes to mechanics in terms of its combat. And it was kind of just, again, disappointing and underwhelming, because I was really hoping that as you got more salutors, you could start building towards these different playstyles, these different ways of approaching combat that would give you maybe some really overpowered builds, but also, really encourage you to mix it up. And in more ways than just, oh, this enemy is now going to take 80% less damage. I don't like that until you attack them with a particular salutor. It's like, yes, you're encouraging diversity, and yes, you're encouraging the player to use their entire skill set, but you're not doing it in a way that's fun or manageable, and you're not doing it in a way that I could circumvent that challenge through creative thinking. I have to do it that way, or it's just not getting done. So let's move from combat to the open world exploration. So I'm going to kind of lump in open world exploration with the speech mechanics, with the investigation mechanics, because it's all part of that. Now, the open world in itself, or kind of semi-open world, I suppose, is interesting. It is exciting to some degree to explore, because there's a whole bunch of new stuff for me to click on, a whole bunch of things for me to find. But notice that I just said there's a whole bunch of things for me to click on. And that is effectively all you are doing in this game. You are clicking and going, investigate, 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 investigate. Okay, follow up on that lead. Investigate, click, 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 click. There's nothing here with depth. There's nothing here with substance to it. And it feels like this weird game that wanted to give you the feeling of being a detective, wanted to give you this feeling of, oh, you're so smart, great job in doing this. But then it doesn't let you take that next step into piecing together the investigation. It doesn't give you clues to say, draw your own conclusion, figure this out. It's just like, oh, this is what Victor thinks, this is what Victor thinks, this is what this means, this is what this means. And yeah, for some people this is going to be like a detective power fantasy, and that's fine. For me, it felt like the worst of both worlds. It's automatic in the sense it doesn't let me investigate anything and like draw conclusions on my own, but it's also so easy that it points everything out to you and lets you just find it, and as long as you have the right number of points in a certain dimension, you can investigate what it means. I would rather it just not have that component, but as a thaumaturge, you seem so focused on creating the story of what this emotion means, what this event means, that I almost feel like it should have just kept the exploration, kept the investigation mechanics, but given you more freedom in how you piece those together. There are so many good games that let you decide, okay, this is what this means. Let the player get it wrong, especially in a game like this where consequences matter. Where I was able to go to the end game missing one of the main characters who was supposed to be one of my allies because I was an ass. I should be allowed to make choices that have consequences when it comes to investigations that would be much more meaningful for me. Now, I say that fully understanding the amount of work that would put on the writers, and that is not feasible for this game. So I understand there's a pipe dream, but it feels like they went halfway and then they stopped. They were like, we want to make you feel this, but we don't have the resources, the people, the whatever we need to fully flesh it out and fully do something with it. So it's frustrating because it has so much potential that is just not there. On that note, the kind of side mechanics of like exploring things and seeing the sights is fun. And I mean, I'm not a big kind of isometric RPG guy when it doesn't involve a whole bunch of action. So it was okay, but a lot of like the little things, the little postcard things, I can't remember what they're actually, like the title is, but they're interesting in the sense they give me more context and more exposition, but I really didn't care. I was chasing them, getting the XP, and then not even looking at the admittedly great artwork that's on the postcards, because there were just so many of them, and they had no gameplay consequences outside of XP, that I just did not care. They had no story relevance for me whatsoever. Now, conversations are a little different. Conversations, as again we see in the previous video that I did, you can influence people and kind of guide them to what you want. You can learn more about them, which is awesome. I appreciate that mechanic. Again, not as well fleshed out as I'd like it to be, because with flaws, as I mentioned previously, you take them from other people. You change who they are fundamentally, and most of the time it amounts to, oh, you get 1 point in this dimension, which is awesome. Let me be clear that I love that, because it was really frustrating sometimes when I didn't have enough points in a certain dimension. But then there are others that just gave you a more generic combat upgrade. Oh, at this percentage of health you do X% more damage, or you do more critical, or you are, less likely to be hit. They weren't things that factored into how Victor acted as a person. And again, this would have created so much more writing, so many more lines for the voice actor to record. Not just Victor, but all of the NPCs would have had to have been altered ever so slightly, depending on what additional choices you would have to put in. But I would have loved it if the game had given me more options than just pride. I understand that is Victor's primary flaw. That makes complete sense to me. But if I'm going to take something so fundamental to the core of someone else's being, and for myself, I feel like that should have other gameplay options that are reflected in not just the combat by giving me, more in that heart dimension, or more in that I'm at a low percentage of health, therefore I can do something. I wanted speech options. I wanted actions that I could do as a result of taking those flaws. But again, the game didn't do it, and I fully understand why, and I am trying not to make the developers seem lazy or make them seem unprepared. They had great ambitions, and they did not have the tools, time, or people, I'm assuming, to follow through on those ambitions and really flesh it out. This game is not what it could have been. With that, let me get into the skill tree, the skills, and then we'll wrap this up. So the skill tree is an interesting one because, again, it is split into those 4 dimensions, and having salutors determines how far into that dimension you're able to go. What I mean by that is, it determines how far down the skill tree you can go. So the first 4 salutors, as far as I understand it, are, if not necessary and mandatory, at least, like they're encouraged to take them, because otherwise you can't get past that first section, those first, I think, 3 or 4 upgrades down each dimensional path. Now, you already have Upir, which is the one you start out with, meaning you can already go past that first barrier in the heart dimension. But it's the others that are interesting, because you're blocked off progression-wise until you have those salutors. Now, you do get 1 in the prologue, but the other 2, again, are presented to you on a silver platter, and I believe it is up to you in whether or not you take them. One of them I know for sure is optional, in the sense that you can just not take it. At least I believe, maybe I'm mistaken, because this was, I want to say, 10, 12 hours ago that I encountered this, which may lock you out of that dimension, which would be an interesting idea. But the third one is definitely, like, you're encouraged to take it. And even the next 4, that kind of other tier of salutors, for lack of a better term, are scattered. 1 comes from the main quest that you can choose to take or not to take, which will have massive gameplay implications in terms of the story. 2 are side quests, and 1 is just, I found it by following a lead, and it was in a warehouse, and it was super lazy writing. I'm looking at you, Krampus. It's so interesting to me, because these salutors and these, skill points determine how many points you have in each dimension, which will affect your conversations, which will affect your combat, but they also give you different cards and modifiers to use in combat. So it comes with a skill card and a modifier. As you progress through the skill tree, a skill card will give you an actual new attack that does whatever the card says it will, and takes up a certain amount of time to prepare it, or maybe it's a quick attack, meaning you can do it right away. You can only slot, I think it's one card per like time slot, so you're really encouraged to choose different cards for each slot, and depending on the slot you put it in, will change how many modifiers you can put on it. And these modifiers are even more interesting because it means that my fast attack, I decided I want to drain the enemy's focus. Someone else's fast attack, they could try to disorient them, they could try to make them bleed. It gives you, again, that complexity of combat by letting you change up not only what attacks you're doing, but how those attacks affect your opponent, which will then play into whatever salutor you wanted to use on them, or whatever salutor you need to use on them in order for them to be taken out efficiently. So there is a lot to like with the combat system, there's a lot to like with the skill system. My problem is that you can easily lock yourself out of it by not taking that next tier of salutors, and even if you do, you cannot be a jack of all trades or you will be a master of none. So when I played, I got 2 dimensions to a value of 7, which as far as I understand it is the last, or the highest value you can make it rather. So I did not take the last combat card in 2 of these skill trees, but I was not able to get the other 2 skill trees up to a score of 7, which was kind of depressing. I think that I definitely missed out on one flaw, which may or may not have given me more in one of the dimensions. I don't know, because I've never gotten the flaw. But it definitely encourages diversity in terms of when you're in combat, you need a specific number of points in a dimension to be able to fight that character, but it also discourages spreading them out too thin, because otherwise you're going to be locked out of certain conversation options as well as certain potential actions because your points in that dimension aren't quite high enough. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there, but it is an interesting system overall that I don't hate. Okay, let's get a few miscellaneous things out of the way, and then I will properly conclude this video. So there were a couple miscellaneous things I wanted to kind of address here. One of them being the voice acting, which in the beginning I thought, okay, this is decent, this is alright. As the game went on, not so good. A lot of the voice actors here don't feel like they should. You know, they deliver lines awkwardly, or the motion and kind of feelings aren't there in the delivery. There's no, like, bad takes by any means, but there are certainly voices that don't match the characters, and there's certainly some that feel almost lazier than others. But overall, the voice acting quality is not great and not what I was really hoping for, especially from such a story-focused game. I did appreciate the fact that when you were nearing the edge of the world, it went kind of gray as an indicator to, hey, you can't move past this point. I do understand that the developers needed some way to restrict the player in terms of where they could move, and I think this was an interesting stylistic choice that I don't hate, because it wasn't just an invisible wall saying, hey, you can't go here, or hey, if you go here, you're gonna get hit with, you know, friendly fire. But it was a nice way to just say, hey, please don't go here, this is not part of the game world. That was appreciated. I don't know if I've called this out already, but thank you. Dear God, thank you for letting me pause during a cutscene. I don't know why this is not a thing in all games right now, but it absolutely should be. Sometimes we gotta go in the middle of a cutscene to do something real quick. We want to come back, we want to finish that cutscene. We want to experience the work you put into a game, and you make it so hard. Thank you, thank you, thank you to the developers of the Thaumaturge for letting me pause in a cutscene. It is a blessing. Some of the facial animations are very stiff when a character is talking, so not only do they have an odd voice, their face is, as Mass Effect Andromeda would put it, tired, and therefore not really expressive, and not moving as much as you want it to. Now, I want to clarify, I understand this is a limitation because of the number of NPCs they have and the number of voice actors they have. You cannot get all of the facial animations you need when you have this many people going on. With what seems like more of a AA title, I don't know what the budget for this game was, but it definitely does not feel proper AAA. And finally, one of the things that really kind of annoyed me is a lot of quests, and especially a lot of like the neighborhood secrets, the little things you investigate to get XP in a postcard for, happen during the afternoon specifically. Now, I appreciate the fact the game has a day-night cycle and that I can change what time of day it is just by sitting at a bench, but a disproportionate number of side quests, of neighborhood secrets, of many things happen in the afternoon, meaning I can do one thing in the afternoon, it will take me to nighttime or evening, and then I have to go back, sit on a bench, and go back to afternoon. Go back, sit on a bench, go back to afternoon. After every single instance, it was kind of frustrating. Like, why not just let me do the thing in the afternoon and then go do every other thing I wanted to do in that afternoon, and then let me change the time of day when I need to for a quest or when it happens naturally for story progression. I understand the developers are trying to give you this feeling of time moving on as you do these little experiences, but it became more tedious and annoying than immersive. Alright, it is truly time for me to kind of wrap up things up, and I want to give you my opinion on the game. If you haven't already figured it out, I did enjoy this game. I promise you, despite all the criticisms I've lobbed at it, I did enjoy my time with it. I think it has a lot to work on though. Like, this game felt like a half measure, and I fully understand why it feels like a half measure. I fully understand where I would have liked it to go, where I feel it could improve, and I do hope it does improve over time. And I'm mad because I want it to be better, and I can see the potential in it being better, and I'm frustrated that it's not there. Now, I am not blaming the developers. I have no idea why it's not there, though I again have thrown out some guesses that I would assume aren't too far off from the truth. So I want to commend them for the product they have made, and I want to say I really sincerely hope they're able to improve this game over time and make it the game that I know it can be, because so many more people deserve to have that experience and deserve to enjoy the story. With all that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, so much for being here. I know I've been really rambly. I've recorded this video over a couple days, just due to some scheduling issues, and I really, really cannot thank you enough if you made it to the end of this absolute mess. I hope to do a few more reviews that don't take quite as long. Anyway, with all of that being said, I really appreciate you being here, finishing the video. All the typical YouTube stuff would be highly appreciated as well. Liking, subscribing, commenting, everything like that. And I will hopefully see you very soon in the next one. Bye-bye.